go? All right. Thanks everyone for coming and letting me speak again. I spoke last year on projection mapping, and this year I submitted a proposal to speak about teaching with Blender, specifically teaching with pro software versus free and open source software. Again, thank you. It's an honor to speak here. I'm going to speak in three parts. Part one will be about the word pro. Part two, how FLOSS, or free, libre, open source software, changes the learning environment. And part three will be about dependency. So let's start with part one. The word pro, which, it looks a little dark up there. Again, my name is Brent Patterson, and I teach at the State University of New York in Buffalo. And the college at Buffalo. There's two SUNY schools there. Anyway, this word, or suffix or prefix, we see it in lots of different sections, gets a lot of traction these days. And I want to have a closer look at how this word is used and wielded across lots of different products. Apple has been using this word for a while, and but not as long as we might think. They've been using the word a lot. And so have a lot of other companies. Avid and Adobe likes this word, and Microsoft's getting into the game. A lot of other companies are using the word, and I guess you can play video games like a pro these days. Pro memory and so forth. Apps like this word. I hope doctors are pros. And you can control your volume like a pro. I'm not sure how that works. You can feed your baby like a pro, as well as your dog, and clean a carpet like a pro. You can run your church like a pro. As well as read the Bible like a pro. And so, and then there's this guy, which you can buy and I guess go pro. So that's the name of my talk, is Don't Go Pro. So thanks for listening. So this talk is geared, I guess it's for this audience, but I'm sort of preaching to the choir here. This talk is really for the aspiring artist and student, but it's also especially for educators. And it's especially for educators of students under 12 years old. And so with this crowd, I know I'm sort of, like I said, preaching to the choir, but I want to use this talk as a platform to reach out to educators, hopefully all over the world, and hopefully some people will give this a bit of a listen to. So the marketing of pro software is basically based under the premise, learn the software and you are a pro. And so pro software tries to sell itself and sell a narrative that they're the gateway to professionalism and financial success, and thus happiness. And free and libre open source software, FLOSS, it doesn't make this promise necessarily, it just sits there. And so the opposite inferred by pro software is amateur, not pro. And I apologize for my terrible drawings that are going to be throughout this presentation. So this is marketing. And the marketing implies that the people who use pro software are professionals. They're the learned individuals who make money and lead their industry. And I think this is a little bit of a paradox, because at the same time, the pro software says it makes it easier, makes your work easier, and it makes it easier in some ways, but that's also exactly what amateur or prosumer software promises to do, is to make your work easier. So there's some paradoxes going on here, and I'm very interested in that. So what does professional mean exactly? There's lots of different definitions, but what I would say it actually is, it's a dedication to a discipline. Someone who knows where their discipline's been, where it is and where it's going, and they contribute to their discipline in meaningful ways. They're an expert in their craft, but they're also an expert in the content of their craft and what it means. So I think it's onerous marketing to say the pro software makes it easier. It tells students a narrative that's a false narrative. It trivializes deep understanding and expertise and the importance of process. It also fosters dependency. I'll talk more about that here in a moment. And I think the marketing itself of pro software is detrimental to both students and professionals, but more so to students. And that's what I want to focus on in this talk. So that's why I'm reaching out especially to educators of public school teachers or educators for public school who think that this kind of software is too complex for their kids. It's not. They can teach it. So part one, I started teaching with Blender about 12 years ago, and I noticed right away that my students' work was progressing really quickly. Within a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, they're able to produce work that was far more advanced than with other software, pro software that I'd been using. And I started wondering what was going on. They were having a lot of fun, and they were going way beyond the assignments that I was designing. Not all of them, but about 75% of the students were coming to class early. They were staying afterward. They were asking lots of questions when I started using Blender in the classroom, as well as other free and open source software, GIMP, Krita, not so much with Inkscape, but it's coming along. So I think it happens for a number of reasons. I'm going to theorize on that and ruminate on that. This work by Alexis was just turned in last week. We're teaching with 2.8 this semester for the first time, and it's going well. It's going really, really well. But at the top of the semester, or at the beginning of a class, I try to give assignments that give students a sense of awe and accomplishment right away. So I'll design a simple ceramics project where they just use curves, and then we build a cyclorama and light it, and then render it at really high resolution. So in this way, they're like, wow, look what I just made, and they'd only been using Blender for a couple weeks, and they hadn't done any 3D work before this. And so they're able to build something that they didn't think they could build. And so that ability to be impressed with themselves gives them motivation to keep going into the deeper stuff, to help them through that sort of trough of despair when they realize how much they don't know. But I wasn't the only one experiencing this. This is the work of Francisco Mireles-Aguayo in Leon, Mexico. And he started noticing this happening with his students at a Montessori school as well. He says that his students were more driven, more excited, and becoming better problem solvers right away. And so he sent me several videos of his students in a state of flow, really drawn to the work, and here they're designing cars and then 3D printing them, something that they didn't think they could do. And this also is very impressive to administrators of schools, seeing students actually making things and excited about work. And it's creative, it's problem solving. They have to use all their other classes in the work. They have to really integrate logical thinking, but creative thinking, so it's a really fantastic platform to learning on. But why is Blender having this effect? So the marketing, I think, of pro software is very, very critical because it changes the learning agenda. The learning agenda here is, I think, one of the core things that makes this work. And when students have a learning agenda, what they want to learn, it's basically the wind in their sails. And so with pro software, telling them constantly, learn the software, and teachers telling them as well, you have to learn the software. I see assignments in public schools where I've literally seen tests for Photoshop where students have to answer what this tool is and what this tool is and what this tool is without context. And what I realized is if I give a problem and then the student solves the problem, it's sort of fait accompli. I can tell they know what the tool is because they got the project done. And so with FLOSS software, it shifts the learning agenda from software to content and discipline. And there's some other reasons why I think this happens. Blender's yours. You own it in a way. You can do whatever you want with it. You can take it home and play with it. So in this way, it's approachable, it's accessible, and it's easily available to amateurs, but it's also wielded by professionals. It's not an express version or a light version or an educational version that is only for pretend. It's the same version, and that excites the students immensely. And so effective teaching requires a really healthy learning environment. And a healthy learning environment for a creative studio requires a focus on process. Not as much as product, but process. What's going on? Paying attention to how you're learning, paying attention to how your paradigm is shifting. And free and open source software is better for that type of environment. This is primarily fostered and cultivated by the teaching style of the teacher, but I think the intensity influence of marketing by commercial software is partly to blame. Okay, so then I get this question, money. Students need jobs, and I would argue that the need to make money is a very negative factor that sort of infects, in a way, the learning process. With free software, the motivation of production is for profit, necessarily. The motivation to make money, to pay for the software that you just bought, is not there. The motivation to learn is powered by pure curiosity. And this has a profound effect on the learning process. So as a teacher, if your students are curious, well, that's the secret ingredient to putting the wind in the sails of students. It makes teaching easier if the students want the information, if they want to make something. And so basically, I don't have to say, I'm going to talk about this in a moment, but I don't have to say click here, now click here, now click here, now click here. I say, we're making this, and these are the tools to get there, and then I just basically go around my studio playing whack-a-mole, answering questions as they figure it out. And that's a much more lively studio environment. I like it a lot. If you come from privilege, this money issue might not be such a big issue, and you might be able to rise above it. But if you don't come from privilege, like the majority of the planet, I think it makes all the difference in the world. And so that's one other reason why I find it to be really important. But the creative software companies push this narrative. This was on Avid's website just a couple days ago. It's effective. It's, I think, superficially logical, but I don't think marketing interests belong in a classroom, and they're always trying to get in there. And I think I don't know, they corrupt it in a way. And so most of us have heard this phrase, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you ask most people to do something with a hammer other than hammer a nail, they'll be a little bit confused. And kids don't think like this. They don't think with strict categories like adults. So it's easier to explain a Boolean function to a kid than an adult. Anyone here who's tried to teach Blender to someone over 40, you probably know this experience of you're trying to explain a metaphor or a concept for something that there is no relationship in this real world. But kids don't have this problem as much. And so it's easier for them to wrap their heads around these kind of problems. And it's important to get their heads wrapped around these kind of problems early on, before they're even 10 years old. And then they're able to understand these kind of concepts later on. But the emotional impact of making a discovery, successfully solving a problem, and that empowers your students to learn anything. I learned early on that if you couple emotion and emotional experience with learning, then they don't have to study. That the learning happens automatically. And I find that to be much more effective. And you couple an emotional experience with learning by creating situations where the students are going to make discoveries. And, well, Blender is a little bit mysterious sometimes. And it allows them to explore, tinker, and make those kind of discoveries. This fosters divergent thinking. And it's this, as Ken Robertson says, divergent thinking is the essential capacity of creativity. Another issue, or way that I think free and open source helps, is it divorces the core concepts of 3D or whatever discipline we're working on. It divorces these ideas from the software itself. And so we're working with vertices, armatures, materials, shaders, whatever. Those terms, those vocabularies, can then be wielded in other software. So it helps students learn other software more quickly. And also, having gone through the process of learning Blender or a similar software, students are less intimidated by unfamiliar systems. They're less intimidated by complexity and sophistication. And that's a really necessary skill in the coming decades. But these concepts traverse all software, and it helps students be a little bit more mobile. I know that, yeah, I forgot the Apple Store was right next door. So I think Blender and FLOSS software is an antidote to iOS. Something I've seen over the past 10 years or so. Older faculty will say, "Oh, the students are so technology savvy. They can navigate." They don't. They're not. They don't understand what file extensions are when I get them. They don't understand file organization, and iOS especially. It works for them, but they don't make anything with it. They all walk around with HD video cameras, 4K video cameras in their pockets, and they're just watching cat videos. I was making I was trying to do so much with VHS in the 80s and 90s, and now they can make so much and they don't do anything. But they spend most of their waking life in front of these screens now, and to them, these screens are just outlets of consumption, and what FLOSS helps is turns that around, and they become tools of production. And that's something that we're trying to teach, and especially to the young minds. And so it realigns that relationship with these screens. But people don't learn from just following a set of instructions. And if you find yourself teaching in this way, click this button, click this button, click this button, the emotional impact is not there. And so it takes a lot more labor to understand what's going on. So you don't want to push buttons in a specific order to solve a problem. If you're teaching that way, that's how you teach someone how to run a cash register. And that's not what we do, and that also brings Moloch. And it's not a happy learning environment. We don't want Moloch. Because Blender can do so many things for so many people, and it's approachable and sometimes a little mysterious, it's the ultimate creative playground. And those of you here, I know it's been mentioned several times in this conference, you just can't wait to open up a new Blender file and see what you're going to make today. That experience is what you want to try to cultivate. And it's also the perfect platform for a learning environment. And so the last thing I want to talk about is dependency. Being dependent upon something. Pro software teaches dependency. It doesn't really teach it necessarily as it creates dependency in an almost indirect way. And if you're aware of it, then you can be inoculated to its effects. But most people don't notice suddenly they're dependent upon something. And when you're dependent upon it, you're dependent upon their rules, their price structures, their restrictions, and as well as the ecosystems that they build around their systems. So FLOSS teaches non-dependency, self-reliance, problem solving, for the simple fact that it's yours, you own it, you can do whatever you want with it, you can change it if it doesn't do what you want it to do. And a global community has grown up around Blender over the past 15 years. It's more than that, but it's amazing. And what I try to help teach my students is, yeah, there's a lot of YouTube tutorials, and I'm responsible for a lot of bad ones. And how do you discern those tutorials? How do you discern the resources? Helping people become literate in finding the right resources is also very important. And so with every problem that the students encounter, there's pretty much 100% chance someone else has encountered that problem and made a way of getting out of it. And how do you find that? How do you Google it, or how do you ask other people? With FLOSS software, everyone is far more helpful. And I think there's a talk later today that mentions that same thing. People, when they have spent all this money on commercial software, they're a little more reticent to share how they solve problems with it. And what about jobs? Let's talk about jobs again. Moloch, or the industry, needs its workers. They want graduates who can run the software. How will they get jobs if they don't know the software? And I think that's a little bit short-sighted. Technologies fall into obsolescence all the time. I hope, like hell, Blender doesn't fall into obsolescence, but there's a chance it will. And either naturally or because, well, with some products, the owners end the tool itself. And so it's ill-advised, I think, to build your whole career around one software for which you have no control. I've been working in media for 25 years, and I've seen this happen. And people who spend a lot of time with this software, and this isn't like to scare anyone or anything like that. These people all moved on and they adapted. But that's the key. You want to be able to be adaptable. You want to be self-reliant. And so, I think Andrew Price said this yesterday, that the relevance of narrow, specific technical skills will fall aside, but the need for ideas and problem solving, empathy, story, and continuous learning, that's always going to be there. And I think Blender's a really fantastic platform to build that with. And so when you see statements like this, know what's going on. And if you're just aware of how you're being manipulated by that marketing, you can be inoculated to it. And so, yeah. So if you're becoming dependent upon a limited system, just be aware of that. And often now you can only rent the tools that you're using. You can't change them, and if you don't pay the rent, you don't have access to those tools anymore. And my students are really starting to notice this with Adobe. And Adobe is fully aware of what's happening, and they're very smart. They know what they're doing. They make great products too. But the goal here is to only understand the surface of what's going on with these tools. And I do remember there was another company a few years ago that sort of cornered the market and made all the rules, and they started to have they took advantage of the customers. And I don't know if they were over here in Europe, but they made due dates at noon on weekdays. And so then they would charge you over exorbitant fees and so forth. And when a viable solution came along, the customers all immediately migrated away. And so I think viable solutions are here with Blender and other free and open source software. So I'm going to sum it up. I'd like us to reconsider this term professional, or rather pro. When we see the pro suffix or prefix attached to any software, let's reconsider that word is not referring to professional. It's referring to proprietary.